The mining moon was silent except for the sound of cold wind scratching against metal walls. Elias Ward, a human miner, lived alone at the edge of the desert canyon, far from cities or people. He had spent years digging for rare crystals used in starship engines. Surviving on machines, silence, and canned food. Some said the mines drove people mad, but for Elias, solitude was easier than the noise of betrayal and war he had left behind. That night, a storm rolled over the horizon. The orange sky turned black, lightning flashing across the desert like angry veins. Elias checked his drone feed. One of the mining drones had stopped responding near the canyon rim. He put on his breathing mask, grabbed his light, and stepped into the storm. The wind howled around him, sand biting at his face like needles. Every step crunched over sharp stones and broken metal. The beacon from his drone blinked faintly ahead, but as he approached, the light showed something strange, something hanging from a metal pole for a moment. Elias thought it was debris or fabric torn by the storm. But then his heart froze. It was a body. He moved closer, the light trembling in his hand. A young alien girl hung there, arms tied above her head, her skin a pale shade of blue, glowing faintly under the rain. Her hair was tangled with dust, her lips cracked. A wooden sign was tied around her neck with rough wire. The words written in red made Elias's breath catch. The Baron never forgives. Elias looked around, scanning the shadows. His eyes caught movement, a small floating drone watching from a distance. Its red lens focused on him, recording. Elias cursed under his breath and smashed his light against a rock. Breaking the beam, the drone vanished into the darkness, leaving only the storm and silence behind. He turned back to the girl, her body barely moving. She was still alive. Her chest lifted weakly, her breath shallow. Elias's mind raced. He knew the name on the sign. The Baron ruled the western deserts, a warlord who punished anyone who defied him. No one dared interfere with his orders. But Elias couldn't walk away, not again, not after what he had already lost in the wars. He climbed up the rocks, cutting the ropes with his mining knife. The girl fell into his arms, light as air. He wrapped her in his cloak and carried her toward his rover. Her skin was ice cold, her heartbeat faint. Every step was heavy, but something inside him pushed him forward. Back in his metal shelter, Elias laid her on his workbench. Turning on the heaters, her clothes were torn, showing deep bruises and strange marks burned into her arms. He poured water into her mouth, drop by drop. Her eyes fluttered open for a second. Large, silver eyes full of pain and fear. "It's okay," Elias said softly. "You're safe now." She didn't understand his words, but she stared at his face, confused and frightened. She tried to speak, but no voice came. Her throat was raw, bleeding. She grabbed his hand suddenly, trembling, and pointed toward the door. Elias looked at the monitor. The motion sensors flashed red. Something moved outside in the storm. He turned off the lights, grabbed his blaster, and watched the screen. 3 heat signatures, walking slowly through the sand. They were not human, the Baron's scouts. They stopped near the pole where the girl had been. One of them bent down, scanning the ground. Then they turned toward Elias's shelter. Elias cursed silently. The girl gripped his sleeve, her eyes wide. She whispered a broken word that chilled him. "Run." Elias shut down every generator, leaving only emergency power. The scout's lights passed near his window, beams sliding across the walls. He held his breath, his finger on the trigger. The girl tried to crawl off the table, but her legs were too weak. Elias pulled her gently back, covering her mouth as one shadow paused outside the door. Minutes felt like hours. Then the sound of engines echoed again, fading away as the scouts moved on. Elias waited longer, his body tense. When the radar finally went clear, he turned back to the girl. "You're safe," he said again. For now, she looked at him, her eyes glimmering like moonlight through tears. Her lips moved slowly, struggling to form sounds. After several tries, she whispered something small, almost broken. "Lyra." Elias froze for a second, then nodded slowly. "Lyra," he repeated. "I'm Elias." The storm raged outside, lightning splitting the sky. Elias glanced at the screen again. The drone that had watched him earlier was gone, but he knew it had already sent a signal to someone. The Baron would come sooner or later, and when he did, Elias Ward, the lonely miner, would have to decide what kind of man he still was, a survivor or a savior. The morning came slow and cold, a pale sun rising over dunes that looked like sleeping beasts. Elias hadn't slept. He sat beside the metal table watching the alien girl breathe. Her color was returning, a soft silver tone glowing under the heater's light. The storm had passed, but his shelter still groaned from the night's wind. Lyra, that was her name. The sound of it still echoed in Elias's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the sign that had hung around her neck. The Baron never forgives. Those words were a promise of death, and Elias had broken them by saving her. He poured warm water into a small cup and offered it to her. She sat up slowly, wincing in pain. Her arms were wrapped in his old medical bandages. Her eyes watched him carefully, like a frightened animal unsure if the trap was still there. "It's all right," he said softly. "Drink." She didn't understand, but she took the cup anyway. Her fingers trembled. Water spilling onto the table, Elias smiled gently and handed her a piece of bread. She sniffed it first before taking a cautious bite. For a while, silence filled the small shelter. Only the hum of the heater and the low crackle of static from the radio. Elias leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. He had lived alone for so long that the presence of another being felt strange, almost unreal. Lyra looked around the room. Her gaze fell on the metal wall where mining maps and hollow screens flickered faintly. She reached out and touched the glowing lines. Her lips moved as if she recognized something. Elias turned toward her, curious. "You know this?" he asked, pointing at the map. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Her finger traced a symbol near the west ridge, a mark Elias had never noticed before. She looked at him with urgency and said something in her language. Her tone filled with fear. Elias didn't understand, but one word she repeated caught his attention again and again. "Baron, Baron." Before he could ask more, the radar on his desk blinked red. Elias stood up, heart pounding. He checked the monitor. 3 signals approaching from the north. The same route the scouts had taken last night. "They found the tracks," Elias muttered under his breath. He turned to Lyra, who was already standing despite her pain. She clutched his arm, eyes wide. She didn't need to speak. The fear said everything. Elias hurried to the back of the shelter, lifting a heavy metal grate that covered a hidden tunnel. He had built it years ago for emergencies. A narrow passage that led to one of his storage caves. "Down here," he whispered. "Quiet." Lyra hesitated only for a moment before crawling into the tunnel. Elias followed, pulling the grate back into place just as engines roared outside. From the shadows of the tunnel, he could hear the muffled voices of soldiers. Their boots clanged against the floor above. The door to the shelter hissed open. "This is property of the Baron," a metallic voice declared. "All humans are ordered to comply with inspection." Elias and Lyra stayed silent, breathing shallowly. Dust fell from the ceiling as the soldiers stomped around, searching the room. He could see faint lights from their scanners through cracks in the floor above. Then a new sound filled the air, a deep voice echoing from a hologram projector. The Baron's own image shimmered in blue light, his reptilian eyes sharp and cruel. "Elias Ward," the voice said. "You are a human miner, a guest on my land. Yet my message was clear. The one who interferes will suffer as she did." Lyra flinched at the sound of his voice, her hand covering her mouth to stop a cry. Elias clenched his jaw. He could almost see the Baron's expression, cold amusement hiding behind power. The hologram flickered again, showing an image of Lyra hanging from the pole. "If anyone aids this traitor, they will share her punishment," the Baron said. "The desert remembers every sin." When the hologram faded, the soldiers left, taking samples and scanning for traces. Elias waited until the sound of engines disappeared before opening the grate. Lyra climbed out first, her face pale. Elias checked the monitors again. The radar was clear for now. He turned to her. "You know him?" he said quietly, "don't you?" She looked down, silent for a long time, then nodded. Her voice came out as a whisper, rough and broken. "Father." Elias stared at her, stunned. The Baron was her father? The truth hit him like a blow. She wasn't just another victim. She was someone the Baron wanted erased completely. Lyra looked up at him with tears in her eyes and said, "He killed my mother." "Me next?" The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Elias felt a fire rise in his chest. The Baron wasn't just cruel. He was a monster hiding behind power. Outside, the wind began to howl again. Carrying the sound of distant engines, Elias knew the peace wouldn't last. He walked to the weapon locker, grabbed his blaster, and checked the charge. He looked back at Lyra, who was now sitting quietly near the heater. Her eyes met his, filled with both fear and trust. Elias spoke softly, almost to himself. If the Baron wants a war, he'll get one. The radio crackled suddenly, a message breaking through static, a cold voice whispering through the line. Human miner, you can't hide her forever. Elias froze, staring at the transmitter light. Lyra turned her head slowly, whispering a single word that sent a chill down his spine. Found. The next sunrise painted the desert in gold and blood red. The wind carried dust and silence, but Elias could feel something heavier in the air. Watching eyes. Hidden engines, the kind of quiet before danger strikes. He had been hunted before, back on Earth during the border wars, but this was different. This time he wasn't fighting for orders. He was fighting for someone who didn't even belong to his species. Lyra sat near the heater, her silver eyes lost in thought. She hadn't slept either. Every time the storm howled, she flinched. Elias pretended not to notice. He had learned long ago that strength sometimes meant pretending not to see pain. He was fixing his mining drone when a deep hum rolled across the canyon. The monitors on his desk flashed bright red. Multiple energy signatures closing in fast, company, he muttered. Grabbing his rifle, Lyra stood quickly, fear flashing in her eyes. Elias motioned her to stay quiet and opened the small hatch to the underground tunnel again. You know the drill, he whispered. Don't move until I say. She nodded and crawled into the dark space, clutching a metal pendant she always wore. Elias sealed the grate above her and turned back to face the sound of engines. Moments later, the sky outside darkened as 3 armored skimmers descended. Dust rising in thick clouds, the Baron's soldiers stepped out, tall, armored aliens with reptilian faces and glowing visors. Their boots crunched against the sand as they surrounded the shelter. A loud metallic voice echoed through a speaker. Human miner by order of the Baron. We are authorized to search your property. Elias opened the door calmly. Search all you want, I'm not hiding anything, he said. His voice steady though his pulse raced. The lead soldier scanned him from head to toe, then walked inside, others followed. Their glowing visors reflected every corner, every shadow, every tool. One of them knocked over a table, spilling mining equipment to the floor. Another kicked open the small locker where Elias kept his rations. The third soldier placed a round metallic disc on the table, and a hologram sprang to life. The image flickered, revealing the Baron himself, seated on a throne made of bones and steel. His scaled face stretched into a cruel smile. His deep, rumbling voice filled the room. Elias Ward, the Baron said, a lonely human miner working on my land. You have something of mine. Elias crossed his arms. I've got rocks, dust, and machines. That's all. The Baron leaned closer in the projection, eyes narrowing. Do not play games with me, human. My patrols found traces, human footprints and small ones. Delicate, not yours. You dare shelter a fugitive from my house? Elias forced a smirk. Maybe your men can't tell wind tracks from footprints. The Baron's smile faded, replaced by a cold stare. You think your isolation makes you invisible, but my eyes are everywhere, even in your machines. Elias's stomach tightened. He glanced at his drone on the desk. Its camera lens blinked once. He realized the Baron had hacked it, watching everything. The Baron chuckled, noticing his reaction. So you see, human. I offer you mercy, hand over the girl, and I will let you live, continue hiding her, and your death will be slow. The hologram faded to black, leaving only the sound of the soldiers breathing. One of them grabbed Elias by the collar and slammed him against the wall. Where is she, human? He hissed. Elias didn't move, didn't flinch. His voice came low, calm. If I knew, I'd tell you. The soldier tightened his grip, but then his comlink beeped. Orders, fall back. The Baron wants him alive for now. The alien released him roughly, pushing him toward the table. This is your warning, the soldier said, before turning toward the exit. Next time, we burn everything. As their skimmers lifted off, sand swirled in violent circles around the shelter. Elias closed the door and locked it, his heart thudding in his chest. He waited a long minute before lifting the floor grate again. Lyra climbed out, her face pale. Her pendant glowed faintly in her hands. She looked shaken. Baron, see us? She asked softly, her voice rough and uncertain. Elias nodded slowly. Yeah, he's watching. But not for long. Lyra sat down heavily, tears filling her eyes. He kill all my home, my people. He say I traitor, I try to stop him, he make me example. She shivered as she spoke, her words broken but filled with truth. Elias listened quietly, anger tightening in his chest. You said he's your father, he said carefully. She nodded again, her voice trembling. Adopted, he take me when small, say he saved me. But he used me for control, I find truth. He send soldiers. She looked up, her eyes fierce now. I not die until I'll see what he do. Elias leaned forward, his mind racing. You have proof? Lyra looked at him, then reached inside her cloak and pulled out a small, damaged data crystal. Here, she whispered. Evidence all in here, his crimes, his deals, his monsters. Elias turned the crystal in his fingers. It was cracked, but still functional. If we can get this to the Galactic Network, the Baron's done, Lyra nodded. But he come fast now. Outside, the desert wind began to rise again, bringing the distant echo of engines. Elias stared out the narrow window, his jaw tight. He's not getting her back, he said quietly. Not while I'm breathing? The radio suddenly crackled again, the same cold voice whispering through static. You made your choice, human, it said. Now die with her. Elias shut off the radio, looked at Lyra and said, Pack what you can. We're leaving this place tonight. The desert storm was coming again. But this time it wasn't just weather, it was war. The desert sky burned with lightning again that night. The horizon glowed blue from plasma storms, and thunder rolled across the dunes like an army marching unseen. Elias worked quickly, packing supplies into his rover, while Lyra watched through the narrow window slit. She kept her pendant close, the faint light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. They had been running for hours when the crash came. A bright streak tore across the sky, cutting through clouds and vanishing behind the ridge. Seconds later, a deep explosion shook the ground. Elias hit the brakes, sand flying up in waves. What was that? He muttered, scanning the radar. A blinking signal appeared about 2 kilometers north. Lyra grabbed his sleeve, her voice trembling. Baron drone. Or message pod. Elias narrowed his eyes. Either way, we need to know. He turned the rover toward the signal. Engines humming low. The crater still smoked when they arrived. Metal debris burned in the sand. Hissing from heat, Elias stepped out, keeping his blaster ready. The smell of fuel and ozone filled the air. He brushed aside a chunk of twisted plating and froze. It wasn't just any drone. It was a recon pod from the Baron's fortress. Its marking scorched but still clear. The insignia of the Baron's personal seal was carved on its hull. Lyra's breath caught. This from his chamber, she whispered. Only his command used this. Elias knelt beside it, prying open the half-melted hatch. Inside, he found a damaged data core still glowing weakly. Looks like your father dropped something important, he said. A grim smile on his face. Lyra looked frightened. If this core sends signal, he know it lost, then we better hurry, Elias replied, tucking it into his bag. Maybe this has what we need to bring him down. They climbed back into the rover and headed toward the old mining tunnels hidden under the cliffs. Elias had used them before to store equipment. But tonight they'd be shelter and maybe salvation. Inside the tunnels, the air was cool and heavy with dust. Elias set up a portable light and placed the data core on a workbench. He connected it to his terminal, sparks flying from the damaged circuits. Lines of alien code flickered on the screen. Encrypted, Elias said. But I've cracked worse. Lyra stood close, her hands trembling. It hold proof. I know it. He kill colony leaders. He take their children, make them soldiers. Slaves. Her voice broke slightly. He call it mercy. Elias looked up at her, anger burning in his chest. We'll make sure everyone sees what kind of mercy he gives. Hours passed as Elias worked, rerouting power and decoding fragments. Finally, the screen cleared. Images appeared, footage from hidden cameras. Massive pits filled with bodies. Alien scientists forced to build weapons. Children locked in cages. It was worse than either of them expected. Lyra covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He killed them. All, she whispered. My mother, too. Elias's hands clenched into fists. This is it, he said. The galaxy needs to see this, but we'll need to reach the communication tower at the canyon's edge. That's the only place strong enough to send this data off-world. Lyra nodded, wiping her tears. It's far and his guards watch it, Elias smirked faintly. Good thing I know every inch of this wasteland. But their moment of hope shattered when the ground trembled again. The warning alarm on the console blared. Multiple energy signatures appeared on the radar, moving fast. Closing in, Lyra looked terrified. He find us? Elias checked the monitor. Not yet, but soon they're scanning the area. Maybe tracking the pod signal. He turned off the lights, packed the core, and said, "We move now." They exited the tunnels and climbed back into the rover. The night outside was darker than before. Lightning flashing far away. Sand began to swirl around them again. As they raced across the dunes, Lyra looked back, her eyes catching faint red glows in the distance. Hoverbikes. Fast and silent. "They come," she said, voice shaking. Elias gritted his teeth, pushing the rover harder. "Hold on!" he shouted as plasma bolts began slicing through the darkness, explosions lighting up the sand behind them. The Baron soldiers were relentless, firing without pause. Lyra ducked as one bolt hit the back of the rover. Blowing off a storage crate, Elias swerved sharply, taking a hidden path between the rocks. The engine screamed as they climbed a steep ridge, and for a moment the hoverbikes vanished from radar. They stopped behind a massive boulder. Both breathing hard, Elias checked the damage. "We can't outrun them forever," he said. "We'll hide in the dead canyon. That place eats ships." Lyra frowned. Dead Canyon cursed. Elias gave a dry laugh. "Good. Maybe it'll curse them too." He looked at the sky through the storm. A faint shape appeared far above, massive and menacing. A command ship. Its searchlights swept across the desert like the eyes of a predator. Lyra whispered, "He come himself." Elias loaded his blaster, his eyes reflecting the distant light. "Then we stop running," he said quietly. "Time to fight back." The rover engine roared to life again as they sped into the dark maze of the canyon, lightning flashing over broken war machines buried in the sand. Behind them, the Baron's ships followed like shadows of death, their lights piercing the storm. Ahead, the canyon waited, deep and silent, hiding both danger and hope, and for the first time in years, Elias Ward felt something burning inside his chest again. Not fear, not anger, but purpose. The dead canyon stretched endlessly beneath the twin moons. Its jagged cliffs looked like broken teeth, and every echo of wind carried the ghosts of old wars. Elias Ward guided the rover down the narrow path, its lights dimmed to avoid detection. Beside him, Lyra clutched the data core tightly, her face pale but her eyes glowing with determination. Behind them, the horizon burned red. 3 of the Baron's hoverbikes were still on their trail, weaving between dunes with deadly precision. The storm had slowed them down, but not enough. The Baron soldiers were relentless hunters, programmed for obedience and blood. "Can we escape?" Lyra whispered, her voice trembling but calm. Elias smirked, not looking at her. "Escape? No, outrun them? Maybe." The rover jolted as it hit a rock, sparks flying. Elias cursed under his breath and slammed a button on the console. The back compartment opened, releasing 2 mining drones that zipped out like metallic hornets. The drones flew behind them, locking onto the incoming pursuers. A moment later, bright flashes filled the night. One hoverbike exploded in a burst of plasma. The fire lighting up the storm, Lyra gasped, watching the wreckage disappear into the sandstorm. "You fight like soldier," she said softly. Elias's eyes stayed forward. "I was one. Long ago." His voice carried no pride, only memory. The second drone fired again, striking another pursuer, but the last bike dodged, flying high above and shooting lasers down. A bolt hit the rover's left side. Shaking it violently, Lyra fell forward. Elias grabbed her arm before she hit the metal floor. "You okay?" he shouted over the roar. She nodded quickly. "Yes, but they near." Elias gritted his teeth. "Hold tight." He veered sharply left, driving into a narrow canyon split. The path ahead twisted like a maze, and the rover's tires struggled over the loose rock. Sparks rained from the damaged engine. Behind them, the last hoverbike followed, its pilot laughing through the radio channel. "Run, human. The Baron will skin you himself." Elias turned off the rover's lights and slammed the brakes. The sudden darkness swallowed them whole. The hoverbike shot past, confused for a second, and Elias took his chance. He spun the rover around and fired the mounted plasma cannon. The shot hit dead center. The bike exploded mid-air, raining metal and smoke. The flames lit up the canyon walls like dawn. Lyra blinked, stunned. You did it." Elias grinned faintly. "Don't celebrate yet. They'll send more." He parked the rover behind a fallen pillar of stone. Engines off. The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. Lyra looked at him, her silver eyes reflecting the faint glow of her pendant. "Why you help me, Elias?" she asked softly. "Baron kill you for this." Elias leaned back against the seat, exhaling slowly. Because once someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. A medic during the war, she saved my life. I left her behind when orders changed. I still hear her voice every night. He looked at her. I won't make that mistake again. Lyra stared at him, her throat tightening. She wanted to speak to thank him, but words felt too small. Instead, she looked down at the glowing data core in her lap. Then we fight together, she whispered. Elias nodded, his hand resting on the control panel. Together, he opened a map hologram showing the layout of the desert. We're here, he said, pointing to a blinking dot. The communication towers across the dead canyon. If we can reach it, we can send the data to the galactic network, Lyra frowned. But canyon full of old war machines, traps. Exactly, Elias said with a smirk. That's why they won't follow us there. Only fools enter that place. And lucky for us, I'm one. They shared a faint, tired laugh, the first one since this nightmare began. But their brief moment of calm ended when the rover's scanner beeped again. Elias looked at the screen and cursed, no. It's worse than I thought. A massive energy reading filled the radar. Approaching fast, it wasn't a bike, it wasn't even a patrol. It was a dropship. The Baron's personal guard coming straight for them. Lyra's fingers tightened around the data core. He come, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Elias loaded his blaster and handed her a smaller one. Then let him, but first, we make this canyon our trap. They spent the next hour working in silence, planting explosives, connecting old power lines, and rigging detonators along the canyon's path. The old mining field would become their battlefield. When the dropship appeared above the cliffs, the air vibrated with its engines. The sand rose in waves, glowing red under its thrusters. Elias and Lyra took cover behind a fallen transport truck, their eyes reflecting the firelight. The Baron's soldiers descended like black shadows, armored and armed. Elias counted at least 20. He smiled bitterly. They sent a whole army for 2 people. That's flattering. Lyra touched his arm lightly. We win or die. Elias gave her a firm look. No, we win or we make them wish they hadn't come. As the first soldiers entered the canyon, Elias pressed the first detonator. The ground shook, fire ripped through the narrow pass, collapsing boulders and crushing half the squad. The others screamed and fired blindly into the smoke. Lyra covered her ears, trembling, but when she saw the soldiers struggling, her fear turned to fury. She aimed her small blaster and fired, hitting one of them through the visor. Elias looked at her with surprise and pride. You learn fast, she gave a faint smile. Teacher good. The battle roared on, explosions lighting up the night. The canyon that had once been silent now thundered with fire and vengeance. But even as they fought, a dark shadow appeared at the canyon's mouth, massive, armored and glowing with crimson light. Elias's blood ran cold. No, it's him, he whispered. The Baron himself had arrived, standing tall in an exosuit twice his size, the ground trembling beneath each step, and this time there would be no running. The canyon burned with light and thunder. Fire licked the walls, smoke rose like a living creature, and through the chaos the Baron's colossal exosuit stepped forward. Glowing red through the dust, each step made the ground tremble beneath Elias and Lyra's feet. The exosuit's armor was black as obsidian, covered in blades and symbols of conquest. The Baron's voice boomed through speakers. Cold and heavy. You've caused me trouble. Human, I offered you mercy and you spat on it. Elias stood from behind the half-melted truck, his blaster aimed high. Mercy? You call hanging your daughter mercy? He shouted back. The Baron laughed, a low, cruel sound that echoed off the canyon walls. She is no daughter. She's a failure, a traitor to my blood, and you are an insect pretending to be brave. Lyra clenched her fists, tears mixing with dust on her face. You lie, she screamed, her voice shaking. You kill mother, you kill all who love truth. The Baron's glowing eyes turned toward her. Child, you were born weak, I tried to make you strong. But you learned compassion, the disease of humans. Elias stepped in front of her, lowering his voice. You shouldn't have come here. Baron, the Baron's massive arm raised, aiming a plasma cannon the size of a car. I come to erase mistakes, Elias dove, pulling Lyra down just as a blast ripped through the air. The shockwave threw them against the rocks, pain shot through Elias's back. But he forced himself up. Stay low, he muttered. Grabbing a detonator from his belt, he pressed the switch, and another explosion tore through the canyon wall. A rain of burning debris fell, slamming into the Baron's suit, forcing him to stagger, but the Baron's armor held. Fire rolled off him like water. His voice thundered again. You think toys and stones can kill me? Elias gritted his teeth. Not yet, but I've got more than toys. He ran to the far side of the canyon, dodging laser fire that carved glowing scars into the ground. Lyra followed, clutching the damaged data core close to her chest. Elias opened an old control panel buried under the rock, wires and circuits tangled with dust. This canyon was once a mining field, he shouted. There's an old power grid buried here. If I can overload it, Lyra understood immediately. Big boom, she said, eyes wide. Elias smirked despite the chaos. Exactly. They worked quickly, connecting wires, rerouting power through the unstable reactor. Sparks flew, the ground hummed, and energy built like thunder trapped underground. The Baron saw the surge and charged forward, his massive feet crushing the remains of his own soldiers. You can't hide from judgment, he roared, his cannon charging again. Lyra turned, raising her small blaster and firing at the Baron's head. The shots bounced harmlessly off his armor, but it caught his attention long enough for Elias to pull a lever. A blinding flash filled the canyon. The power grid screamed as ancient machines came alive. Electric arcs shot across the rock walls. Striking the Baron's suit for a moment, the giant stumbled. Sparks bursting from his joints, Elias shouted, "Now Lyra, run!" But she didn't. Instead, she ran toward the power conduit, placing her pendant against the main circuit. "This hold his signal," she cried. "If it burn, he lose control." "Lyra, no!" Elias shouted, but it was too late. The pendant glowed bright white, fusing into the machine. The explosion that followed was deafening. The Baron roared in fury, his suit sparking violently. His control systems blinked and died. The plasma cannon on his arm exploded. Ripping half his armor apart, he stumbled to his knees. His massive form shaking the earth, Elias limped forward, smoke and fire around him. "It's over, Baron," he said through clenched teeth. The Baron looked up, his scaled face burned, his voice full of rage and disbelief. "You, a human, you ruin everything." Elias pointed his blaster at the cracked visor. "That's what humans do best," and fired. The shot pierced the glass, the Baron's head snapped back, his body falling like a mountain collapsing. When he hit the ground, the entire canyon shook. Silence followed, heavy, endless silence. Elias dropped the blaster. Stumbling toward Lyra, she lay near the conduit. Weak but alive, her pendant was gone. Melted into the machine, sparks flickered gently above her. He knelt beside her, lifting her head. "You did it," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You stopped him." She smiled faintly, eyes glimmering with tears. "Baron." "Gone?" Elias nodded. "Gone." Her fingers brushed his hand weakly. "Then free," she whispered, her voice fading. He held her close as the last fires died out, watching the smoke rise to the stars. The canyon was quiet again, but this time, it wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was a grave for a tyrant. Elias looked down at Lyra, her breathing shallow but steady. He whispered softly, "You're stronger than he ever knew." The wind carried away the last echo of thunder, and above them, the first light of dawn broke through the clouds. Elias stood battered and bruised, looking at the horizon somewhere out there. The galaxy would soon know the truth, but first, he had to make sure Lyra lived to see it. He picked her up gently, carrying her through the smoke and silence, his steps slow but steady, each one echoing with purpose behind him. The Baron's broken suit still sparked. The last symbol of power turned to rust ahead. The rising sun painted the sky gold. Elias Ward, once a forgotten miner, now walked toward something greater, justice and a promise to keep. Smoke still curled above the canyon like ghosts refusing to leave. The air was heavy with burnt metal and dust. Elias stumbled through the rubble, carrying Lyra in his arms. Her body was light, too light, her skin pale but still warm. Every step hurt, but he didn't stop. The world around him was quiet now. Too quiet. The Baron was gone, but the silence felt fragile, like the calm before a storm that no longer knew where to strike. When Elias finally reached the far end of the canyon, the storm had passed. The stars looked sharper than ever, bright against the endless black in the distance. The faint silhouette of the communication tower stood tall on the ridge, its lights flickering weakly. He laid Lyra down near a broken transport crate. Her breathing was shallow, her silver eyes half open. "Stay with me," he whispered, brushing sand from her hair. "We're almost there." She blinked slowly, trying to speak. "Baron, gone?" Elias nodded. "Yeah, gone for good." A faint smile touched her lips. Then, My people. Free. Not yet, Elias said softly, looking toward the tower. Not until the galaxy knows what he did. He set her safely behind a rock and began the climb toward the old comm station. The structure groaned under its own age. Antennas twisted, panels broken. The door hissed open with a metallic whine when he forced it. Inside, the control room flickered to life. Weak lights fighting the darkness, Elias placed the data core on the console, connecting it to the ancient uplink. The holographic screen glowed faint blue, showing fragments of images: wars, prisons, the Baron's crimes, his secret deals with black market fleets. The evidence was all there, but the power cells were almost dead. Come on, Elias muttered, trying to reroute energy from emergency reserves. Sparks danced across the console. The transmitter hummed to life, and a faint connection opened to the galactic network. He hit send and the data began uploading. The signal bars rose painfully slow, 10%, 30, 50, then stopped. No, don't die on me now, he growled, slamming the panel. From outside came a faint sound. Engines, small ones, not the Baron's fleet. Elias froze, then ran to the door through the haze. He saw faint lights descending from the clouds. Small ships, sleek and white. They bore the symbol of the Galactic Council. He rushed back inside, watching as the upload reached 100%. The console beeped once and flashed green. Transmission complete. Elias let out a shaky breath, his shoulders sinking with relief. It was done, the truth was free. When he returned to Lyra, her eyes fluttered open again. You did it? She asked weakly. Elias smiled tiredly. No, we did it. Above them, the sky shimmered as the Council's dropships landed nearby. Soldiers in silver armor spread out, scanning the area. One of them, a tall alien with golden eyes, approached carefully. Human, he said in a calm, deep voice. We received your transmission. The Baron's empire has fallen. You've done something remarkable. Elias just nodded, too exhausted to speak. She needs help, he said instead. Pointing to Lyra, the soldier knelt beside her, scanning her injuries. She will live, he said softly. You saved her. Lyra's trembling hand reached for Elias's, her voice barely a whisper. You saved all of us, for the first time in years. Elias felt warmth spread through his chest, a strange, deep peace. He looked up at the glowing sky as the Council ships began to lift survivors from nearby colonies. News broadcasts across the network were already playing fragments of the Baron's crimes. His empire collapsing faster than he could ever have imagined. Hours later, Elias stood outside the med shuttle where Lyra rested. A gentle light filled the cabin. She slept soundly now, her face calm, no longer haunted. A council officer approached him. The galaxy owes you, Ward. What will you do now? Elias looked out across the desert, watching the rising sun turn the canyon gold. I'm just a miner, he said quietly. Maybe I'll start rebuilding what the Baron destroyed. He paused, then smiled faintly. She deserves a home. The officer nodded respectfully and walked away. Elias stepped closer to Lyra, kneeling beside her bed. When she stirred, he whispered softly, Rest now, Lyra. The stars are yours again. Her lips moved in a faint smile. And yours too, Elias, she murmured, half asleep. Later that night, as the Council ships rose into orbit, Elias stood at the canyon's edge alone, watching the endless expanse of stars. The wind was gentle now, carrying no fear, only promise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small shard of Lyra's melted pendant. Still faintly glowing, he held it tightly, whispering. She burned her light to destroy his darkness. A voice came over the comm. Elias Ward, this is command. The network wants to speak with you. Heroes don't get much rest, do they? Elias smiled faintly. Not my kind, he replied, turning toward the ship waiting to take him away. As he walked aboard, the ship's lights cast a warm glow across his tired face. Behind him, the dead canyon lay silent once more, the grave of a tyrant and the birthplace of a legend. And far above, in the Galactic Network's broadcasts, one name echoed across 1,000 worlds, Elias Ward. The human miner who defied the Baron. Lyra's image appeared beside his, her soft voice recorded from an earlier moment. He showed me what it means to be free. The galaxy listened, and for the first time in a long while, it remembered what humanity truly was. Not conquerors, not monsters, but the ones who bring light where even stars are afraid to shine. The storm was over, but their story had just begun.